There we go. Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this morning's virtual Idea Talks. Thank you all so much for joining us today, this beautiful, cloudy, kind of sunny Saturday morning. I think we all got received some nice relief this morning, so I hope you all have your champagne for breakfast. So welcome everyone. This is our second Diversity and Inclusion Idea Talk series. Today we're going to be discussing supporting millennials in the workplace, why that's important, why that's needed. And I'm very excited for a discussion today. Good morning, good morning. Hi Andrew, hi Elaine. Yes, good morning everyone. So nice of y'all to join us right on time as well. So we're going to hop right into it. Here's what today's going to look like, right? So we have our welcome. I'm going to go over our community agreements. For those of y'all who don't know me, my name is Karen. I'm just some random person talking on the screen. And for those of us who aren't familiar with Zoom, I'm just going to assume that everyone's familiar with Zoom at this point. But for those of us who are not, you do have your controls on the little bar there that I'm sharing the screen. So I think you'll have the controls on top. But please make sure to mute yourselves while you're on this virtual platform with us. Sometimes even if you are in a space that's very quiet and you're the only person, there sometimes is some background noise that could come in. So please ensure that you are muted unless asked to unmute. Yes, and hello, good morning. Good morning, Francis. Good morning, everyone. And good morning, Lillian, good to see you. Yes, you have the option to unmute, but please go ahead and keep yourself on mute while we are having discussion, just so there's no feedback during our recordings. And I am recording the session. I hope it shows that I'm recording the session. And I'll go over, community agreements, introductions, then we'll go into our speaker discussion with our amazing speakers lined up for today. We'll have a Q&A portion at the end, last 10 minutes, and then we'll close and share some resources with you all. Let me move forward here. So just some quick community agreements. We want to make sure we foster a space for others, right? So share the space. We're all here together. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others. We're all learning. Nobody's perfect. Nobody has all the answers. We're all learning at the same time. And be curious. Keep an open mind and an open heart. And, you know, if you hear something and you're curious about it, maybe try it on. You know, take what you learn, apply it in a way that feels good to you. And, you know, I opened this chat to anyone who wants to add to the community agreements. If you feel like there's something that needs to be on here, please go ahead and add that for this space that we're all sharing today. And I also want to pose a question, you know, what do you hope to gain from this experience? So keep that in mind. If you want to share that with us through the chat, you are definitely welcome to. And, you know, for the Q&A portion, if you want to pop your questions into the chat box, you can. Or if you want to table that, you know, and hold that till the end for the Q&A portion, you can definitely do that as well. And well, who are we, right? So here we are. My name is Karen again. I am the programs director with AAPA. AAPA is the Asian American Professional Association. Maybe remember that to focus on commonalities and not just differences. Thank you, Elaine. Yes, good community agreement to add that. You know, focus on what we have in common rather than what we what differs. But you know, sometimes with differences and challenges, that's how we learn about each other, right? So thank you very much for that, Elaine. So yes, Asian American Professional Association, we have three main programs. So our very signature is our signature mentorship program, where you receive one-on-one mentoring through our experienced network of mentors. We have a lot of our mentors joining up with us today, so thank you all so much. We also have a board leadership program where we learn what it takes to be a board member on a nonprofit board. Essentially, we're training you how to be a board member. We have our AAPA Toastmasters Club, where you become a better public speaker and you develop your communication skills. And due to the pandemic and pivoting to the virtual realm, we have launched virtual AAPA Idea Talks this year. And essentially, the Idea Talks are just this virtual space where we have discussions with our community on topics that are important to you and relevant of the times. So that is where this, you know, diversity and inclusion discussion came. And today we are so excited to be having this discussion with Bamboo and Glass. So Bamboo and Glass is about Don and Sophia, two Asian American women sharing the underrepresented perspectives that are shaping their lifelong journey of learning and unlearning. On it, you will hear Asian Americans reckoning with their place in the world and discovering the abundant possibilities of who they can choose to be in their careers, families, relationships, etc. You should listen if you've been searching for the right words or inspiration to start important conversations with yourself or loved ones. So this is a podcast for folks who weren't sure what I was talking about. And I'm so excited to introduce our amazing, amazing speakers for today. We have Dawn Kim, who's a former software engineer at Google, pursuing an MFA in film and TV production at USC. She graduated from Stanford with a BS in symbolic systems and an MS in computer science. In all aspects of her life, she has been motivated to champion diversity and inclusion, whether it is speaking up in a meeting to better their team culture, choosing who to feature on the podcast, or creating short films of underrepresented narratives. She is inspired by folks who've taken the road less traveled and proactively thinks about how to better serve their communities, and she hopes to do the same no matter where she is. And then we have Sophia Sun. Sophia is a product manager at Microsoft HoloLens. She creates tools that enable frontline workers to remotely collaborate on complex 3D assets. Along the way, she earns patents for tools that make mixed reality experiences more accessible and comfortable. A through line of their creative endeavors is identifying others' strengths and enabling them to shine. She's inspired and motivated by people who creatively integrate passions that seem unrelated and create new opportunities for themselves and others. And Liana Liana's passion for diversity and inclusion was ignited at a very young age by observing her parents work toward these goals while growing up in Houston, Texas. As a teenager, she began working with her parents and community groups towards the acceptance of all. This has driven her to participate in numerous diversity and inclusion efforts on behalf of Bank of America, which she currently works in the Data Analytics and Insights Technology Division of Consumer, Small Business, and Wealth Technology. She is a risk and governance execution lead for a suite of applications within that space. Liana has been working in web and data technology for over 22 years. She has been with Bank of America since 2007, joining via legacy company acquisition. So our speakers have a load of experience, and I'm so excited that they'll be having this discussion with us today. So please, I will go ahead and give the floor and the platform over to Dawn, Sophia, and Liana. Please take it away. Oops, sorry.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that introduction. So thank you all so much for joining us for this event. We are Bamboo and Glass, and we're a space where two Asian American women share the underrepresented perspectives that shape our lifelong journey of learning and unlearning. I'm Tan.
And I'm Sophia. We're so happy to be joined by Liana today, talking about supporting millennials in the workplace. And Tan and I, we're millennials, pretty recently graduated from college, and we're really excited to get your perspective, Liana. And so do you want to start us off by telling us what motivated you to really care about diversity and inclusion, and especially supporting millennials in the workplace?
That's a great question. Thank you guys for asking me. Thank you, AAP, for having me here for this discussion as well. I have experienced exactly the same thing that millennials are experiencing as a Gen Xer. I specifically remember coming into the workforce and not looking like anybody else, and it wasn't just my appearance, it wasn't just my gender in a male-dominated field. More than anything else, it was my age. Very specifically, I had a client tell me, one of my first client meetings, by the way, so I had no tools on how to react to this comment. And the comment was, you guys just need a good war to thin out your herd and teach y'all a lesson. And it was very specific to my generation. And, just, of course, first client interaction, your confidence just plummets with that kind of, with that kind of interaction. But, Sophia and Thon, like, what about you guys? What experiences have you had when you first came into the workplace?
Yeah, so I actually also work very closely with clients, and something that I have really appreciated that my team does is really set me up for those conversations. Like, for example, my manager will be like, hey, big client. You will be talking with Sophia today. She's an expert on XYZ. And so I think without that, I think I might face very similar bias for my age, especially because a lot of people I'm talking to are CTOs of companies who are used to talking to very senior people at Microsoft. But to answer your question more directly about what challenges I faced transitioning from college to the workplace, my biggest challenge was understanding what my relationship with my manager should be like. Kind of figuring out, what support should I expect them to provide? What can I do to improve my relationship with them? What's the difference between a mentor or manager or a sponsor? What can I ask from them? Like what should I like what what kind of support should I ask from them? And the reason this was challenging is when I look back on my time at college, my professors were the ones assigning me homework and grading my homework. And when I was done, I would finish the class and that would be it. I would move on to the next class. Whereas a manager, you can have a really long-term relationship with them. And they're not only the ones who are like, quote unquote, assigning you work, but you also kind of need to play a role in figuring out what work do I actually want to do and how can I ask my manager to open those opportunities for me. So that learning what that relationship could look like was really tough, especially when my first manager was not very supportive. And no matter what I did, I didn't feel like they were really receptive to my interests, or I didn't feel like they were willing to go out of their way to find opportunities that I expressed really mattered to me. So I'm curious, Han, if you resonate, if any of this is similar or different from your experience starting at Google.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with everything both of you have said so far. I think age was definitely one of the biggest players in, I felt, people's interactions towards me. We have a culture where we are supposed to welcome feedback and wanting to focus on building up the team culture so that it is diverse and inclusive. And being the only woman of color on my team, on my first full-time team, they would invite me in for these conversations, but I would be very conscious of the fact that I was a woman of color, but I was also very young, one of the most junior person on the team. And I was met by multiple people in leadership when I gave feedback of them saying, oh, well, that's just how full-time goes. Like, that's just that you're going to have to just get used to it. And that was just very invalidating for me to hear, because then I wasn't sure which opinions of mine really mattered, which ones are the ones that people wanted to hear. And so, and I agree with Sophia with before joining the workforce, anyone who's older than me or has more experiences has always been like a power of authority to me. Like, they are, again, the people who are assigning me things, and I was never taught how to advocate for myself, how to be open about my interests, because school and life were very, very separate from each other. Like, I don't share personal life things with my professors, and in some ways, like, it was kind of the same separation in work, but at times, like, it does overlap a lot because you are spending 40 hours a week, or even more I know that for Sophia, she spends more than 40 hours a week sometimes on her work. And it's really hard for those things to not get intertwined, especially in the civil and political unrest time we live in right now. It is really hard to kind of navigate, like, what are topics that are acceptable to talk about on your team, while also being very conscious of, oh, I am the youngest and also the most at risk with my career. I don't have an established career. So that was my experience because I ended up working at Google for 2 years. And so I'm so curious, Liana, for you, what were some challenges that you personally faced as well, like transitioning from college to working full-time? That has been a big topic on our podcast as we kind of explored our post-grad journeys. And so I would love to hear from someone who has more experience and also has seen the other side as well as a manager.
So that's a great question. And so I will also tell you that I graduated out of Texas A&M at a different time also, at the start of the internet age, basically. This is like late 90s. And people were starting to make money off the internet. So I had interned at AMD. I had a job offer also from American Airlines in control systems. My background was electrical engineering. But then there was folks that were making money off the internet, and I was just tired of being a broke college student. And I wanted, this company was offering the opportunity to travel and to go to the quote unquote dark side of software, because that stuff was coming of age at that point in time. It was a great time to get out into the marketplace. And also we also didn't have any of the structure of the big companies to help us into the transition, right? So the gentleman that I went to work for, it was a small company, and he had a lot of corporate experience and background, and he was a very nurturing person. And yes, it was he was a white male, that was actually very accepting of the fact that, hey, you are new. But I will say that my direct manager and some of the other ones that I was reporting directly to were not that well versed or well educated in those skills. And I wish that if I just had, the chance to give myself advice, going back in time, I would just tell myself, like, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to accept your position as the new person in the room and let everybody know that you are the new person, and for them to understand, to have patience with you. I was afraid to speak up. Culturally, we're taught not really to speak up. It took me a long time to even look somebody in the eye and talk. And that's strange to think that I find that person that I was very foreign. Like I'm looking at the camera right now, but I mean, I will look at you directly when I'm talking to you now, but I was not that way when I started. And I definitely, I have seen myself grow in that, like just looking up and facing who I was speaking to and understanding, that gives you some sense of authority. Like I actually know what I'm talking about. Yeah, there's maybe a couple of months where I really had no idea what I was doing or talking about. But with the next client onward, I was pretty comfortable, and I should have been able to express that comfort and stand up for myself. And it's okay to stand up for yourself in front of a client. I also learned that, I think, a little later than I wanted to. But what about you guys?
As in, kind of how we've grown since our first 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are so new, and we're all still growing our careers, right? There's no end in sight to growth. I mean,
there's no peak to your career necessarily.
Exactly, because you can change your career. So, and I know, Donna, in your case, you're transitioning to another career. What was that like, and what, from a decision standpoint, what made you decide to do that? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So I think there were two major things at play. I had grown up being really discouraged from pursuing the arts. I grew up playing violin, and when college came, my parents were like, absolutely, you are not applying for conservatories or music schools. Like, you're going to go to a university, which I'm very thankful for. Like, I really loved my experience at university. But I ended up discovering a filmmaking class one of my last years in college, and just really loved it. And that was probably the first time in my life where I was so eager to go pursue something without other people telling me that it's the right thing to do or that it's a good choice to pursue it. And so I just kind of kept learning filmmaking, whether it's watching YouTube videos or trying to meet as many filmmakers as well wherever I was while doing my full-time job. And by the end of my first year, I had been like, I think I do just want to try applying for school and just see where this goes. And so now I'm at USC. But another thing would definitely be learning the fit of the tech industry itself for me. I had done internships at Google before joining full-time, and I honestly can't really tell you if I ever had a very positive experience at my workplace. And I always thought that Google was such a big workplace, a big company, and so maybe I could find my niche somewhere. And I still believe that that's possible. And for everyone out there who wants to join a big company, I think that is definitely possible. But I just felt so small all the time when I was working at these big companies, and also when I was unhappy at my workplace. I also felt a lot of guilt, a lot of inherent guilt for feeling this way, because I had been taught that financial stability and working at a prestigious name brand company was the most important thing. And once I have that, I should be very grateful. And I am very grateful for that experience and for all the doors that it had opened for me. But also, I needed to give myself the space and acknowledgement that might have not been the best place for me at that point. And I did grow a lot. And that's the other thing that I heard a lot at my workplace was, with any challenge that came, it was always framed as, oh, this is a great opportunity for growth. Yes, of course, like any experience you have is a great opportunity for growth, but that doesn't mean you have to go through that opportunity. That doesn't mean you should stop advocating for the projects that you want to work on, the people that you want to work with. And I had always felt very stumped being in this position, because it felt like if I were to disagree with them, I was being resistant to wanting to grow and wanting to be stagnant. So I would say that resistance at work, as well as my growing interest in filmmaking, was really what pushed me to change my careers. But I am still very grateful for the first couple of years I worked, because I know that's going to help me a lot as I go into the entertainment industry, which is a very much more hierarchical structure compared to tech. And I am hoping that from that tech experience, I will be better equipped to advocate for myself, whether it's in internships or my first entry-level job. So thank you so much for asking, Liana.
Yeah, it's interesting that, and I'm glad you brought something up about, because I remember when Google showed up on the internet. I very specifically remember like playing with that feeling lucky button and all of that. Like, and it's so funny that you mentioned Google as a well-established brand name company, because I remember making decisions based on the fact that I don't know if that company's going to last. I mean, coming from the .com era, like I did, a lot of those companies didn't last. So, and you know, those websites are now different from what I remember them to be. And the structure of a large company, I chose the job I chose as a rebellion against it, right? Against going to the big guys, the AMDs and the American Airlines of the world. I was like, no, I'm going to go to this small startup. And I enjoyed it. And for me, it was like the flip of yours, where I think that startup experience gave me permission to think independently. It's where I learned how to speak for myself. Whereas I feel like if I had started off at a large company, I would have become a cog. I would have not had my voice, because Gen Xers, we were trained to be the cogs. We were already told we were slackers. We were already told that we weren't good enough to join the workforce that everybody that came before us had built. So this is all you're going to be good for. And, you know, you're going to have to work your way through the system the way the rest of us had. I mean, that's what the hierarchical side of the house was telling us. It was the tech boom and the tech challenge that happened that changed the way the large guys thought. And also those tech companies, those startups became the large companies, but they never lost that other spirit, but they also gained some, you know, experience around maybe some hierarchies. Okay. It's, you know, it's not all going to be a flat organization. I am always fascinated by those of you that have come up through that transition, because I still have an uncle, you know, uncles and aunties, how we have them in our cultures, who to this day points out the fact that he, in no certain terms, feels like I've wasted my EE background because I'm at Bank of America these days. And, you know, when you tell people what you said in college and then you tell them that you work at Bank of America, they're like, how does that work? You know?
Yeah.
But to me, the road made sense. It makes perfect sense. And the other thing we have in common is I do have a performance background. And that's where I drew that energy from, by the way, to speak, was I taught piano. I actually applied to piano for like at Berklee's College of Music.
Oh, wow.
My parents freaked out. I actually very, very specifically understand that feeling. I have a dance background as well, but culturally, I think this might be just specific to Asians and other POC maybe, but we encourage the arts, but we discourage the pursuit of them beyond
like
a
the
certain
professional
level.
pursuit.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I find very interesting.
Yeah, it's also so fascinating to hear your experience of watching the internet grow and seeing the beginnings of it, because for us, like by the time we went to college, it was like one of the hottest companies to go work for, right?
Right.
And I also really want to draw a parallel to what you just mentioned about like aunties and uncles. Like I think something that shouldn't be ignored is the culture of the American dream, because for context, my parents are the youngest in their respective families, and we are also the only people who didn't live in Korea. And so we immigrated when I was 10 months old. And so from a very young age, there was a lot of anticipation around our family, and I guess specifically my personal growth in childhood of where I would end up. And I remember being so anxious about my first Google internship, or getting an internship in the first place. And then luckily Google got back to me and I was able to go there, and I was really excited, just so relieved. And my dad was telling one of my cousins about, who's a lot older, he was telling her about how I'm actually going to be working at Google. And the first thing out of her mouth, and this is someone who has like taken care of me when I was a young girl, she was like, oh, did you, like, to my dad, she was like, did you help her get that job? Like, did you use your connections to help her get that job? And so I felt the pressure even from like my own family of wanting to prove, I guess, my work ethic and that I didn't need the help of my parents, who have obviously sacrificed a lot in order to get me where I am, but that I also have intrinsic worth and value and am able to contribute without a ton of networking and connections as well. And so that was something that I struggled with on the family side, as well as, you know, the societal idea of financial stability and wanting to work at name brands. But I also do want to hear from Sophia, for you.
Yes.
How have you've been working for a little over 2 years now. How have you grown since graduating? And what are some current challenges that you're facing as well?
Yeah, so one of my favorite resources at work are our professional development workshops that are put on by a huge employee resource group called Women at Microsoft. So one of the pieces of advice that I got is that when you look around at the different opportunities that you have and you do something well, you should amplify the accomplishments that align with your aspirations. And I thought that was a very interesting piece of feedback or advice, because it's so easy just to do what you're told, but there's so many different directions that your career could go. Like as a product manager, there's so many different facets of my job. And so and the more I do something, the more I become an expert on it, and the more people see me as an expert on it, for good and for bad. And so what I mean by that is, so one example is like when I first started, my team had no documentation. Our documentation was a year behind product truth, which is really very a bad situation to be in. And so I was like, oh, I just want to step up and be a good team player. I'll rewrite all the documentation. And then I ended up being seen as the expert on documentation. People would defer to me to it. People would be like, oh, Sophia's the pro on this. She'll just make these changes. And this was not something that I wanted to be seen as an expert in, especially because the opportunities that were adjacent to being good at documentation were things that I was not interested in, right? Like, oh, it has nothing to do with creating the product strategy. It's very much like, oh, our product is shipped. How do we story tell it? How do we create the release documents and videos and stuff? And so I think that piece of advice was really impactful for me to think about, like, hey, don't just do everything that I'm told. I need to have my own personal filter of what I want to learn and make sure I do more of that, because then I get seen as an expert on what I want to be seen as an expert on. I get invited to do things that are adjacent to that, and that just kind of grows more and more of my opportunity in that way. And so, yeah, I'm curious, Tan or Liana, what is advice that you got throughout your career, especially if you got it earlier in career, that you think really shaped the trajectory of where you ended up going?
I will say some of the best advice I got was from one of those managers that I think some of the worst job experiences offer the best lessons, right? So I had a boss who people called the little tyrant. This person was not very tall in stature, and they were also just kind of not known for their kindness towards the new people, as we were known as. So, but they also gave some of the best advice, and I ended up earning this person's respect. So when I went to go work for a .com directly, this person had my back. And actually I turned this person that other people thought of as the enemy into a frenemy slash, friend. I actually didn't actually go, I went to their wedding. So, it was, we got to be good friends. But the advice that they gave was, I'm not in your head. So in communication, just make it as simple and as plain as possible. And I heard the same information, the same feedback from my boss, like a boss ago. Actually, I'm still in touch with this gentleman at B of A. And he said, talk to me like I'm 5. And I said, not like a 3-year-old. And he said, no. The joke was like, they either tell you to talk to them as like a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. And I said, not a 3-year-old, Paul. But he said, no. Talk to me like I'm 5. I can at least draw, right? So, but basically, that was the best piece of advice that I ever got, because it informed my writing and how I write, not just the technical, communications that I have to give to executives that are 3 levels above me, but also with just communicating tech to non-tech people. I learned that from this person. Just from the get-go, they would take my emails and they would tell me, take the time to tell me, like, hey, when we talked in person, this is what you said, but this is what you wrote. Help me figure, what did you really mean? Because the written record, the email was going to last longer than the conversation in our heads, right? So that was the best piece of advice, is just communicating better. What about you guys? I mean, you guys are so early on in your careers. It's like, I can't even imagine that. I mean, Sophia, it sounds like Microsoft, which by the way, I have to give kudos to Microsoft for being that blend of that old company and also like taking on the new, like just in general, you guys have that nice hybrid working for you in the tech space. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I shared a bit. Tana, I would love to hear from you what advice that you got from peers, mentors, ERGs.
Yeah, I'll say that for interviewing teams, like if you're looking for your next step in your career or even just starting off your career, where to go, always remembering that you are interviewing the company, the team, or the program just as much as they are interviewing you. I think it's so easy especially when you're so young, it's so easy to be so eager to want to be impressive and to impress others and see and put people on a pedestal, because I think that was something that I honestly had a really hard time unlearning, because I was so used to seeing older, more experienced people as powers of authority in front of me. And so being able to put myself in that place of empowerment really enabled me to think about, okay, what are some questions, what are some things I do want to experience on my team, and like, let me ask this directly so I know where this person's priorities or this team's priorities lie, and if that aligns with me. And remembering that it's all about fit. It's about the culture. There's no hierarchy of like, this is the best team or the worst team. It really just depends on your personal communication and working style and what you're personally looking for. And so don't discount that. Another thing that's not really an advice, but an experience that I had was we ended up having a manager change on my last team. And we were all like super nervous about it because we know this person is super high up, and we were on a front end team, and this manager was actually coming from a back end team. And usually I think just culturally back end is always seen as a lot more sophisticated, a lot more challenging compared to front end. And so we were all just very nervous about the new arrival of leadership. And in the first meeting we had with him, he was so honest about how he knows nothing about front end and he is going to be asking very stupid questions. And even for him to just showcase that sliver of vulnerability and openness and honesty just really made me think, oh, this is someone I could go to and share my vulnerabilities and my insecurities openly with them and seek advice from them. And so that in its own way, having a manager who was willing to be honest about their mistakes and also honest about the places that they need to grow was just very empowering for me to see, and be able to see our relationship as more equal rather than just, he's my manager and he controls every aspect of my career, basically.
Yeah. How did I actually, go ahead. Oh, I wanted to ask more about your experience gauging culture, because you actually, when you were working in the New York office for a year, you transferred to the LA office and you met with, you were very much interviewing the LA team, making sure they were worth your time, that you wanted to be on that team. So I'm curious, what are some of the red flags and green flags that you have experienced in the workplace, and how that informed what questions you asked to gauge culture?
Yeah, so I guess I'll speak a little bit to that transition. So at that point, I had been applying for months looking for a new team, because I just had confirmation that the current team was not the place I wanted to be. A lot of people were actually leaving our team. And so even in the span of the first 6 months of my career, I was all of a sudden one of the senior members of the team. And that was honestly very burdensome for me, because I felt like I knew nothing. And I felt that there was this huge weight of responsibility on me. And I wanted to, and if I'm at a big company like Google, like I was really hoping to get some of that mentorship, and that mentorship was kind of like slipping away from my hands, for lack of better words. And so I was applying, and I remember I was only applying for New York offices, and I ended up visiting LA, loved it. And I was like, okay, what if I applied for an LA team? And so I just happened to look, there were a lot of openings for my current level. And the first place I applied to, the manager got back to me the day after. He asked, hey, let's get on a call for like 15 minutes. So we scheduled a call for the next day, and then we go overtime on that. And so he's like, okay, let's schedule time again later in the afternoon. And by the time we chatted in the afternoon, he was like, okay, so when do you want to come? So basically I got an offer 2 days after I had hit the apply button. And I think what really stood out to me about this manager was that he never asked me about my technical abilities. He said that if I'm at Google, he's like, if you're at Google, I already trust that you are very technically capable and that you are able to get the job done. So what I'm really looking for is whether you'll fit into our team. And so just the fact that he prioritized team culture really spoke to me. And he also had invited another person on the team to talk to me. And so it showed that he really cared, that he wanted me to get a chance and get the best experience for me to talk to everyone. And he actually referred me to someone who was leaving the team, which is, pretty unusual. And he said that he figured that this person who's leaving the team is probably going to have the most unbiased opinion of the team, because she has nothing at stake to be able to share and to have it. She doesn't have any incentive to get me to join the team since she's already leaving. And then she ended up just giving the most glowing review of this manager, told me how she was leaving the team and she was thinking about joining like team A. And the manager was like, no, that's not a good team. Let me pull some strings and get you on a better team. And so it just showed me that he cared about his team members as actual people, not just, and cared about their well-being, cared about their success, whether or not they stayed on the team. And so that, I think, was a huge green flag for me. And something too, like with me leaving for school this past year, I was just so shocked that people wanted to keep me on the team. And again, I think that just speaks to how much I had discounted myself and my experiences. And I think if I had been maybe a little bit more vocal about wanting to hear any celebrations, any feedback, positive feedback is even, that would have been super, super helpful for me. But some red flags I kind of mentioned already. Framing everything as an opportunity for growth was really discouraging for me to hear, because it felt like I really didn't have a say in anything that I wanted. I think another big red flag was, again, people leaving my team. And luckily, a lot of these people stayed at Google. And so I was able to talk to them, chat with them, and be able to hear about their perspectives and see some of the things that they have mentioned still modeled like after they had left. And that really, that was the confirmation I needed. And I think if I went back, I wish I had been more upfront with my fellow team members and asked them like, hey, like, what are some challenges you are experiencing on this team, rather than just giving the team the benefit of the doubt, like, which I still would do, but still choosing to be critical. Like, you can still care about a team and still be critical and want it to grow and want it to change. And that would be the advice I would give my younger self, I guess. So,
you know what it is like with management, especially, and it's something that I tried to do when I had a team, and now I'm more of an indirect manager to a lot of people that which I actually find to be more challenging and more fun. We can talk about that. We'll put a pin in that for now. But I had a team that was US based and India based, and I had to figure out a way to get these people connected. And a trick I learned from a previous boss was just asking a simple question of everybody: what's your favorite dessert? It was just one of those silly questions that you ask. And how I knew I won the team over was when one of the two team members in India, they were talking, and one of the gals was kind of nervous about trying to get something done by a particular deadline. And this other guy chimed in and said, no, if you get it done, we'll get you some chocolate. And she's like, deal, I was like, yes, I got them to talk about, because they were so formal with each other and even with us, that I felt that without that cohesion, they weren't going to be able to really come together as a team, because you had somebody working on one little piece, and we're talking, I'm here in SoCal, we have people in other parts of SoCal, other parts of Texas, and then India. And I'm like, how am I gonna get these people together? And we really didn't rely on video calls as much as probably we should have, but it was just a simple thing of getting people together. And I thought what your manager did about seeking a team cohesion, I can't see the word today, cohesiveness, where basically he's looking for somebody who could fit the organization, because he trusts the company to have hired somebody who's already competent in everything else. And there's something that I read about getting away from those silly interview questions that I used to give and I used to get with the like, why are manholes round? Those kinds of questions. And I'm glad to hear that didn't happen. And I will say, I interviewed for one of your two companies, I won't say which one, and I got the interview, I got the job, but it was one of the best interviews, because Microsoft and Google have what people in the tech industry consider the hardest interview cycles, both, right? And but I found it to be, I was recommended for the position, but even then I had to sit through a full day. and it was worth it. And but I was moving, so I didn't necessarily get to take this particular company up on the opportunity. But I will say, thankful for the opportunity for the interview. And from the outside looking in, it's still, I think, one of the funnest things I ever had to do.
Yeah, and I think like even your interview process, like for you to have felt so comfortable and safe in the interview space speaks a lot, because
I still remember it. Like
they cared about a potential candidate who they didn't even know if like you were going to get the job, like you weren't yet confirmed exactly. So that, I think the interview process is also like a really important marker and indicator of the company, because it really shows like, okay, is this the kind of environment I'm excited to go into? So sorry, Sophia, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. Liana, I loved your comment about the dessert and being the one to kind of open up the conversation and make people feel like they're allowed to ask a more casual question. So I think my first impression of my current manager, who I adore, one of the things that he told me the first week I joined the team was, he was like, our one-on-ones can be a variety of conversations. You don't always have to be strategic with me. Sometimes if you just want to rant to me and you just want to talk to me like I'm a friend, I'm open to that. And to me, that was absolutely pivotal in my thinking about my relationship with my manager. So I know that a lot of people in the room, you might be managers yourself. You might think, oh my gosh, millennials, they're just trying to hop around jobs all the time. How can I get them to—
I was accused of the same thing.
Like, how can I really understand what they want? Why is my report jumping around without why do they not tell me what they actually want? It's because we're really afraid of backlash, or we're really afraid of retaliation. But when you as a manager, when you're upfront about saying, hey, you can talk to me like a friend and I won't ding you for that, I think that was very powerful. And so there are some moments when I was like, hey, I just want to tell you that I had a really rough time talking with this client, and I knew that my manager wouldn't interpret it as like, well, seems like Sophia is not mature enough to handle these hard conversations. Sometimes I just want to share with him that I had a hard day, and I think that builds rapport in such a powerful way. And so so again, Leanna, love that comment about managers taking the initiative to show their team what kinds of conversations are welcome.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to add, Sophia, that with the whole millennials hopping around, the fact that Liana also said that that was something you were accused of too.
Yes.
I think that just shows how we just aren't set up from a young age to know how to navigate those conversations and to know what we want to look for, because we have always been in the position of, oh, I hope I get accepted into this school, and I hope I can ace this class, and I hope I can have a good relationship with this professor. It was always very people pleasing and institution pleasing, that when we are finally in the position where we are supposed to be in a career that makes us feel fulfilled, and if we have the privilege to even search for that, we don't know how to navigate that, and all we know is hopping around, honestly.
Because we aren't, to your point, it's about the people pleasing, but my take on it is that we have to please ourselves, and we have to basically, yes, we are our own, we are the masters of our own destiny finally. And we're like, wait, what was my destiny again? It's like, an actor line, please, but what am I supposed to do? I don't know. I did everything. I was set up for this level, and I've got another 40 years of life that I've got to fill, and I don't know what to fill it with. And so we, as a culture, I think Asians and POC culture immigrant POC culture in the US, we knew what was expected of us to a certain point in time. And then now you're settled, now you're done. And you're like, wait, that's it? But work is telling me I have to think about all these other things. And I kind of want to, but I'm now in this job. Am I trapped here? And then you learn that you're not trapped. But I also think that, I was called out on certain parts of my resume in certain interviews, because they're like, well, you were only here for that long. Why were you there? And I learned to turn those things into stories about why I left. I was very candid, hey, I left because I saw my job was being, and this is a true story, one of my jobs was being shipped to Poland. And I was like, yeah, I can live in Krakow, Poland, or I could actually, understand that they are trying to lower costs and move my position overseas. And maybe it's time for me to exit. And, I
And
turned
those
that
are the
into a
things you
story.
have to like
Yeah,
decide whether you want to compromise or not. Yeah, I
exactly.
actually for
Yeah.
my interview for my LA team, one of the first question that he had asked me was like, it seems like you've only been here for less than a year. Like, can you explain to me like why you're leaving? And I remember being so intimidated by that question because I was like, oh no, like he thinks I'm not capable. But he was so understanding because he like has been at Google for a really long time, and so he understood the churn was very unusual for even Google, and that was just something I wasn't looking for, and he accepted that. I also wanted to mention that a green flag for me is I think at Google there was a huge culture around employee resource groups or ERGs, and I really gauged whether the team was a good fit if they were enthusiastic about people participating in ERGs, and if they were okay with, because we have this culture of 80-20, and sometimes you don't know if that's just lip service of, yeah, we promote 80-20, but it's actually 120. Like you still have to do your job 100%, and a 20% for the ERG. And so I was lucky enough to be a part of the Asian Googler network in the LA office. And I know, Liana, you have experience with building and growing ERGs. I would love to hear about your experience. What were some of the challenges that came with starting an ERG, and what kind of impact has that had on other folks? Like if you know other POCs who were interested in these ERGs.
I've got so much to say on this. Well, my ERG experience started back in Texas, and I basically when my legacy company got bought by B of A, I did certain things for that other legacy company based on the site that I was at, and I wanted to do that kind of stuff because it just kind of was another way for the family, my work family, for us to be able to get together and do good things in the community and things like that. Then I was introduced to actually OLA, which is our Hispanic organization of leadership within B of A. That was the first ERG that I joined. And then I discovered the ALN, the Asian Leadership Network in North Texas. And I ended up becoming the co-chair there for a year, and then I moved out to Southern California. And I moved to a part of Southern California where I was not near any of my coworkers. I was not near any operational site for the bank. And I was very isolated. So I was trying to figure out, how do I reconnect with ALN? What's ALN like in Southern California? Do they even have a chapter? I know like I would lose money, to them for certain kinds of big events, when we're dividing up the financial pie for ERGs within the bank. So I knew that they existed, but they didn't exist where I was here in North San Diego County. And via some other employee networks within the bank, I got reconnected to ALN in Southern California. And then I also, within a year of that reconnection, was voluntold by one of the founders of actual ALN within the bank to restart the San Diego subchapter. And I was like, great, I work from home. And what's the Asian population like? And she's like, remember, we're ALN, but we're B of A. There's a lot of people there that you can connect to. And so she got me hooked up with some of the executives down here in San Diego that happened to also be of Asian background. And we started it off. I think it was 2014 that we kicked it off. And I'm happy to say that I don't have to be as hands-on anymore. Like the best part is when you don't have to do anything and it's still running. And so San Diego subchapter is run by some wonderful people that are within the business side of the house, but they also have a lot of good community connections. Remember, I'm still a fish out of water coming back to California. It's my second time living here. So I didn't have a whole lot of other connections, but I made them once I started to really rediscover this part of Southern California. But I will say ALN, Asian Leadership Network, led me to AAPA, number one, but also it's my work family. Even today, like a memory came up on Facebook of a particular opportunity at the bank that I got because of ALN. And I owe a lot to that ERG. And I will say also, when I worked here and lived here last, I worked for another financial services company on the technology side. And my mentor was at this company. And I'm going to give a shout out to Trying French. And she's going to maybe see the podcast later, but she is my technology mentor. And when she learned that I was moving back, I think that there was this idea that I might go back to work at LPL Financial Services, because that was another work family that I was really, really close to. And I turned it down because they didn't have an ERG culture. That's how important it became to me to have a resource group, They really didn't. They threw money and donations at community nonprofits and things like that. But B of A, we get involved. We're there on the front lines with our red shirts and now the white shirts. We're constantly super involved within our communities, and I really wanted to work for a company that still did that. So
yeah, Liana, I'm so curious, like why this ERG mattered so much to you at different points in your career. What kinds of support were you looking for that you found that this ERG provided?
So that's a great question. And I will say that my role is entirely, I attribute it entirely to the ERG, because when I transitioned out to California, I was with a specific division of the bank, and an opportunity arose that my manager at the time said, he emailed it to the entire team and said, every one of you is qualified for this job. If anybody wants it, it's, I will 100% back you on taking it. And by the way, that is the culture at B of A as far as management goes. Like if there's an opportunity there, the whole thing about lip service, I thought, oh, they might stand in my way. No. They actually encourage you to move around and get experience across the different lines of business. And so the other good thing about this particular opportunity for me was that it was more California based rather than Texas based. And there was a hiccup though. The job description said that they didn't really want a remote worker. Well, I still went ahead and applied. My boss at the time, Bob, was like, no, we'll see what we can do about that. And then when the recruiter called me, I looked up the name and I was like, that looks like I recognized the number for some reason. Well, the recruiter was somebody I knew from back in Texas, and she recognized me from ALN. And she said, yeah, we're gonna, don't even worry about that clause. And I'm gonna, you know what, we're gonna get you some more money too. So yeah, that's basically, that was a couple of years ago, and I moved on to other roles since then, but I am forever grateful to ALN for that connection, and myself and that particular person's connection via ALN is how I got a better job, got more money too. I mean, it was just kind of like an added benefit, but yeah, I didn't have to wake up for 6 a.m. meetings anymore for a while, so that was kind of nice.
Thank you
But
so
yeah,
much, Liana, for
yeah.
sharing your experience with ERGs. I think ERGs are really a place for community building, and it's awesome to hear that you were able to find community and you yourself became one of those community builders at your workplace. And I would be super honored to have someone to have been able to work with someone like you. I wanted to end with asking about what are some missed opportunities for all of us for managers to support millennials or people early in their careers. And I guess just to keep it short, I'll go first. I think one missed opportunity would be for a manager who has more experience and a bigger network. I think a missed opportunity is when someone asks for support, and if the manager is not able to give that particular support I would encourage them to also reach out to other folks that they know in the company or other folks they know outside the company to provide that support. I think it also helps widen the person earlier in their career, their network, and it allows us to feel empowered and to feel like, hey, this person is invested in my growth regardless of how much I'm contributing to this particular team or not. So that's the missed opportunity I would mention. What about you, Sophia?
Yeah, so just to keep it quick, I think a lot of times when managers are coached to facilitate conversations in the workplace, they're asked to, give everyone an equal chance to speak, kind of prompt people, encourage people to speak, especially if they're a woman of color and maybe socialized to stay more quiet. I think the exception, though, would be conversations about race and power. I think there are times when it's good to encourage people to speak, but there are times when when I think women of color would, I'll just give an example. This was during the kind of Black Lives Matter protest. There was a Black woman on the team, and she actually shared feedback with me that she did not enjoy being put on the spot and being forced to share her story. So something to really think about would be, how are conversations about race and power perhaps maybe different to facilitate than normal conversations about something about your product or like something that you're building together. So could talk more about that in the Q&A if we want. But Liana, let's hear from you to close it off.
Sure. So my advice for anyone in management, especially for getting a team that is diverse, at least to open up about their diversity, is get to know them one-on-one first. And then you would have found out that your the Black woman on your team maybe not that comfortable to talk about her particular experience, and then you can maybe work with them offline, and you don't have to have them tell their story. I get maybe permission to tell their story for them, or something else, but basically get to know your team members one-on-one. And if they don't put the one-on-one on the calendar, put it on there for them, make them comfortable with the idea.
Thank you so much, Liana, for sharing your experience with us. I know for me and Sophia, it is honestly an honor to be able to chat with a fellow woman of color, Asian woman, who has a couple more years of experience in the workplace. So we were really appreciative of that. And I guess we'll move on to the Q&A now. Karen, would you like to help us direct the Q&A?
Yes, of course. And oh my gosh, thank you all so much. That was such an insightful, super engaging conversation. I was just sitting here like nodding most of the time, just like hard nods, and like everything just resonated so much. And I mean, yeah, just as a millennial myself, everything that y'all said, and then growing up, API and API woman in a corporate setting, it's just, yeah, everything y'all said resonated so much. And I think in the chat as well, folks are like, this is super insightful. And because you're both, all three, very honest about your experiences. And of course, like, we want folks to be transparent, and we want to be able to be honest and transparent as well in the workplace. So I think that's why these conversations are absolutely necessary. And y'all talked on a lot of points where I feel like we can have a whole other hour discussion about that. And folks are very interested in that too. So I would be, yeah, I definitely want to continue the conversation with y'all. But I know we are short on time, so I do want to get on some of the questions that popped in from the chat. Francis asked one early on, but I think through the discussions we got that answered already. His question was, do we have awareness of how millennials feel and their challenges in the first entering the workplace? So we did touch on that. And Noi asked a question, two questions actually. According to the Pew research, Generation Y make up a third of the workforce, about 56 million. Gen Z will make up about 61 million. What advice would you have for them? And question two is, from a diversity and inclusion perspective, what are your thoughts on belonging? So either Sophia, Don, Liana would like to take this on.
Sophia, why don't you go first, and I have an idea, but I wanted to hear what you guys had to say first.
Okay, sure. In terms of belonging, I think I'll just speak for Microsoft and the teams that I've been on, there's this amazing shift towards inviting more diverse candidates into the workplace. But a challenge that I've really felt is I am a woman and I'm the youngest person on my team. And it seems like the older people with more authority and work experience are men. So it especially more white men. And so it kind of sets up this it's hard to see role models that look like myself, but also sometimes I would just defer to a lot of the white men on my team because they have more experience. And so I've had challenges like really teasing apart, like, am I listening to this person because they're actually right, or because they've just been able to ride on the clout of being here for a long time and having that title. And so as a earlier in career person, something that I've really struggled with is kind of seeing people like myself be considered more junior and less experienced, because we are. And so that is something that I think would become more and more interesting as more, or maybe that issue would be kind of, wouldn't be as kind of, would be less severe, I guess, the more millennials and Gen Z we have in the workplace, and the more diverse people kind of make it up to these higher positions.
Yep. You said something about the white men riding their coattails or something. One of our executives just mentioned a stat that I just love the fact, by the way, that we all three came from really nerdy companies. So this stat from GitHub was that whenever they took a code review, they changed the name of the developer from the woman that wrote the code to a man, and that same code that was originally rejected, remember, they didn't change the code, they just changed the name, the code passed 50% more. So what does that say about men and women, the gender, the perception of gender in the tech industry? It was eye-opening and kind of sad if you think about it. that women's code was scrutinized and failed that much more frequently when if a man wrote the same code, it would have passed. I got that stat just a few days ago and it's still like in my head. So I'm still trying to figure out how we would do something different. I would say from the hiring perspective, take the names off of the resume, take everything off of the resume that indicates what anything is about that person, other than their experience, and you'll get different candidates for sure. You might actually get better candidates, and you'll get diverse candidates guaranteed. And there's a diversity in thought, there's a diversity in opinion. And the fact is that being the younger person in the room, oftentimes you're going to come at the problem from a different angle than the person who has been beaten down by experience. Sometimes that is the problem. And I think, Sophia, that's sometimes what we even tend to defer to in the workplace. Like, you know, it happens to be that the upper echelons of most tech companies are still male, and still predominantly white as well. But it's, you know, the experience that we bring to the table is our unique perspective, our, hey, childlike perspective, right? Like, we actually don't know. So we're going to try something different. You know, I'm going to come at it completely differently than you. And that's something to just honor and respect about yourself.
Yeah, I think with diversity and inclusion, I see it as two parts. I think diversity comes a lot with hiring, making sure you hire a group of people who come from a range and diversity of backgrounds, but also inclusion comes within the company, within the team itself. Like, how are you making sure people feel comfortable to bring their full self, whatever that means to them, whatever they're comfortable with. And I think that it is a disservice to marginalized, lesser represented folks to get, if you are looking for those people to hire on, I think it's a disservice to them if you don't prepare the people under you or the people on your team to make this a psychologically safe and sound place for that person to join. I know Google had done a study about collaboration, and the most effective collaborations, one of the highest aspects and values of those teams are that they make sure that their team is feels psychologically safe and that they belong. And so I think I would say just be critical whenever you see, like, you know, those like diversity brochures, like, you know, like schools like to do like the whole, oh, we have like 50% men and women and we have like all of these different racial minorities. Don't just stop being critical there, because the numbers only tell a part of the story. Because once you join the company, how many of those people are leaving the company? How many of those people are going up to middle management, like leadership roles? Like, that is also just as important and not as visible a lot of the time to the everyday consumer. And so if you have the privilege of being within the company that has these issues, just being vocal about that, and also making sure that you protect yourself first. I think that's also very important to keep in mind. And it's also a lot of labor on people of color and people who are early in their careers to have to navigate these conversations while also navigating their career at the same time. So I think that is sort of the advice I would give to Gen Z folks, because they are going to be the future generation in our workforce. Remembering that you don't always have to take up the mantle to push these diversity and inclusion conversations. Like, that's shouldn't just be on you. That should also be on the leadership and management of the company. So
yeah, agreed. The team needs you as a team. If you're a manager, actually, it doesn't matter if you're the manager or the individual contributor. Keep in mind that the team around you, there's multiple facets to every individual of the team, and they're not able to share some of those facets with you because maybe there's something about the team culture that's making them uncomfortable. And once you stop and listen and look around a little bit more, you start to gauge and you start to really understand that there's people around you that may not be as open or may not be willing to be as open, and you have to honor that too. So, you know, just I'm trying, you know, Sophia, I keep going back to the person that was on your team that was being maybe put on the spot. And I had similar conversations with some of my colleagues as well, that I'm not the expert on this and I really don't want to talk about it. You know, I'm here to work. And, you know, I was like, all right, you know, and it wasn't me specifically, but it was us honoring this person's wishes. Like, you know what, we just won't talk about it, and we just dove right into the work stuff, and that's fine too, and it's okay. But I think it's important, especially up until today, to be able to, you know, it was a more charged conversation, and I think a lot of people and a lot of workplaces were maybe afraid of that charged conversation. But I will say that other companies were brave enough to take it on and say, you know what, let's create a safe space. Let's make it okay to talk about, and let's make sure that everybody feels safe to talk about it.
Wow, thank you for insightful answers. Y'all are really, yeah, we can really go on for the rest of the day in this conversation. And we've actually gotten a few questions, so I don't know if we're going to have enough time to get through all of these questions, but I have 4 lined up. Thank you, Andrew. I want to close the questions in the chat box. I'm sorry if folks have other questions. I will share some resources. Thank you, Sophia, for sharing some links to your podcast. I wanted to share resources for all of us to connect afterwards at the end, but I do want to make sure that we do get as many questions as possible answered. So Lillian asked, for young professionals who are not in orgs with ERGs, smaller companies, what do you recommend they do to get similar support and resources as they would from an ERG to support their professional development and growth?
Yeah, I would love to answer that. So something that I've learned to do is whenever I encounter someone in a meeting, so for example, I'm in a meeting with a client and there's someone from the account team there and they do a great job handling a difficult question, I'll follow up. I'll start with a compliment, be like, hey, I loved how you handled that conversation. I would love to learn maybe more concrete tips you have for me doing that in other settings. And can I put 15 minutes on your calendar? And I think this 15-minute part is key because at my workplace, at least, most people's default settings for their calendar is 30-minute block. And so when you say, oh, can I have 15 minutes? It sounds very non-threatening. Everyone has 15 minutes, right? And so you ask for 15 minutes, you put 15 minutes on their calendar. And if the conversation goes really well, they'll be like, oh, you know, we can chat for the rest of the 15 minutes before my next meeting. And so my tip would be to kind of observe the people who are around you, especially if they're not within your direct team, and you can get perspectives and you can maybe share things that you would feel more comfortable sharing because they're not on your team. So kind of keep an eye out on the people who you work with. Note what is a skill that they have that you want to learn and that you admire, and ask for a 15-minute meeting. And if it goes well, hopefully that can turn into a 30-minute meeting. And fourth, just arrive with a lot of questions and ask them good questions in a way that makes them feel like excited to be asked for their expertise. So that would be my advice.
I agree. For me, I would say if you don't have ERGs and you feel that you're disconnected from the rest of your organization, then definitely reach out to AAPA and other organizations like it for the network and support you need. If you can't find that professional board of directors inside your company that can help you with your career choices, there's a network of us out here that are willing to be a part of that with you and help you grow. And maybe you find out that organization isn't the best fit, or maybe we get you the courage you need to create the first ERG. And if it's not big enough, then maybe you have a conversation with the people that started the company, or if they're still available, get them to understand a cause that's important to you, and maybe not at the ERG level, but maybe a single community event or single holiday or something else. Like Diwali is coming up for South Asians. So if you guys are inclined, then maybe do a little something for that, just as an example.
Yeah, I think just to add, one last thing to add is if you're at a small company that doesn't have ERGs, even just asking people around you who have more experience and have been in the workforce for a little longer, just to introduce you to, like, especially if you vibe with this person, I'm sure that they would be more than happy to connect you with folks that they also admire and really respect. It's just sometimes a matter of, sometimes they're probably thinking like they don't even know if you are interested in talking to the people that they want to bridge you with. And so you vocalizing that really opens the door for you to make more connections and to find not just that one person for who can provide support, but now like 5 people who can support you as well. And so that's just the last thing I want to add to that question.
Great, thank you. This question came in privately for Don and Sophia. Knowing what you know about Gen Zs, how they operate and think, and as you will eventually supervise and manage them, how will you approach being the leader for Gen Zers, future generations?
I can't claim that I know how Gen Z folks think, really. But I feel that community is definitely, I think it's always been important, but I think I'll speak for my family. I don't think my dad, who was a computer engineer, I don't really think he wanted, felt compelled to find community in his workplace. And I think that's a big difference between my dad and me. And I think that, or I project that the Gen Z folks also are going to be looking for a community in the workplace. And so not just treating your team as a community, I think would be my tip and my main thing that I would hope to foster as I go into more leadership positions, because I also want to remember how intimidated I was when I joined the workforce, and I don't want anyone to feel that way. I want people to be excited to share their ideas, share their fresh perspectives, because the world is always constantly changing, and I'm just one person, and I'm not going to know everything that's important in the world and whatever is trending and needs to be addressed. And I'd love to hear from younger folks, and hopefully I can help foster an open environment for them to share.
Yeah, I would say, going back to something we said about people our age, maybe younger, really valuing options and flexibility and getting to move around, especially early in their career, it kind of stems from this fear of us not really knowing exactly what we want, so wanting to keep options open. And so I would advise my future self, if I were to become a manager, to see that very much as an asset. So instead of being like, oh my gosh, this person's going to leave my team, I'm going to lose this talent. Well, another way to think about it is, if you they will then maybe get more experience around the company and just become a more well-rounded person, and that improves your company kind of at large. And also, for example, I really love my manager, and if I were to ever leave my team, I will tell other people about how great of a manager he is. And so it's also a way for I don't know, I'm going to evangelize about how great he is, and I think that's great for his career too. And so I would say, when keeping in mind this desire for flexibility and options, maybe think about, instead of just seeing, kind of pigeonholing your report to what their job title or what they do, really ask them, open up the conversation, what are you interested in trying, and help them find opportunities within their current role to do that. So for example, I told my manager, I love making presentations, I love storytelling our product. He's like, great, let's have you work on this demo. And I, as a report, wouldn't have really known that there was an option until he presented it to me. And the fact that he presented it to me set me up for this opportunity that made me so much more loyal to the team and let me practice that skill while having that skill benefit and accrue back to the team.
I think an advice I had gotten that was really helpful for me, because as a software engineer, you run into bugs all the time, and if I cause a bug, it's like the end. It feels like the end of the world, especially if it's a big product. And I remember reflecting on this with a tech lead on my team, and he said that that's not. This is a blameless environment, and the reason why it's a blameless environment is because it's not about the person. It's not the person that did the wrong. It's the system that is human made that didn't catch this, that failed ultimately. And so we can't spend our time focusing on who did what wrong. It's about focusing on how can this system and process be improved so that it will withstand these fallible mistakes that can be made. And so I kind of see job titles and descriptions the same way. They're just human made. If everyone is on the same page of we have value in everyone on the team has value, and so how can we make sure that what they're interested in, how can we shape their job so that they are able to grow in this area of expertise, and remembering that just because things have been done this way for decades doesn't mean it has to stay that same way. So
exactly. Management, it's a challenge to management for sure.
Yeah, such great points. And I heard some foreshadowing going with our current environment, systems, and humans and humanity. So these points and discussions definitely go further, I think, out of the workplace as well. So great answers. Thank you all for doing this. Second to last question from Jessica. Working in the data sphere, how do you How do you work with other teams, clients, or managers who are not as knowledgeable about the new tech and convincing them to try something different from what they've always done?
I have some insight here just because I've been part of my niche and what I do best is talking about tech to people who are not tech. And for those that know me on the call pretty well, I am a tech snob, right? So I am a giant nerd. I love technology. You know, it's part of my ego space. It's part of my headspace. I can't not be in technology, if you know what I mean. But I also realize that there are people out there like my own mother, you know, that are not very technical. And if I can explain it to her and make her understand it, I mean, she's a scientist, but she's not a tech person, if that makes sense. Like there's a, you know, a disconnect for her. And if I can explain it to her or anybody else that is super not technical, then I have done my good deed for the day. And if I can make it exciting, even more so. But it's a question of being patient. It's a question of absolutely being patient with somebody who doesn't understand maybe even the basic constructs that you're dealing with. And it's the best thing to do to relate it to something that is constantly present in their life. Like I like to give this example of a particular, like a codathon I was a part of a couple of years back, where we were using predictive analytics to predict the delay of certain flights out of O'Hare. That was the challenge and stuff. And I said, yeah, so like if you, wouldn't you love it if you had an alert that kind of told you that, hey, this flight has a tendency to be late. So if you chose it, this is, the probability, stuff like that. So I related to something that they could understand. That would be my advice, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like you kind of can put on the hat of a UX researcher in this sense, because you want to understand what exactly what exactly is it that prevents them from wanting to try something different. Because a lot of times it could be like, sometimes it could be that they actually don't like the company or the product that you are kind of sharing with them, but it could also just be sometimes like just the fear of trying something new. Of it just feels like a huge barrier to have to go put away your old system and your old processes that you've gotten so used to, and to try something new. And so I think really inviting the conversation in so that people can be open and share their vulnerabilities can be really helpful. And that might seem a little bit strange, given a paradigm that you might have between like you and a client and you and a manager. But I think just remembering that they're also human, and they also probably want some outlets to be open and transparent as well.
Yeah, I would really get to know the reason behind why they want to stick with what they want to stick to. Maybe it's part of the brand. It's like Microsoft's brand promise is they have these key pillars and values. So it is really difficult or maybe unstrategic to move away from that. And so I would say, so mixed reality is a very innovative space. I actually have my HoloLens with me right here. This is the HoloLens. Woo! And so something we think a lot about is how can we make sure, maybe kind of, it's like part of like eating your vegetables. Is like a lot of delivering our product and making it successful is delivering the things that are maybe kind of boring and fundamental. Like how can you make it really easy to deploy, really secure to deploy? And so I think maybe one thing you can do is starting off by delivering the things that people feel the most strongly about. And once that's delivered, then thinking about like, okay, now we actually, since we've delivered the promise that people are looking to us for, beyond that, now how can we innovate? So maybe that's a way you can approach the conversation.
Great, thank y'all. And last question, Andrew. Sophia and Don have a successful podcast going and are multi-talented. How do you juggle your day jobs with your outside interests? And do you think millennials believe true life balance involves pursuing your passions, whether in a company or outside of it?
I also want to say that I just learned that Liana has a successful podcast, so definitely would love to hear your answer to this question as well. Well, first off, thank you so much for your enthusiasm for our podcast. I think it's been a process. So Sophia and I have been doing this for almost 2 years now, and we kind of started it as just something to help us keep in touch with one another, because we've always been a long distance friendship. But we just felt that we had some important conversations that maybe others can learn from, and we decided to just publicize those. And I think as we've gained more momentum and more enthusiasm and passion for our podcast, we've definitely had to kind of treat it like a mini company. We have to put down processes, we have to create a pipeline. And that is, again, like, I guess the vegetables that you were talking about, Sophia. It's not glamorous, it's not fun to do necessarily, but it's also necessary for us to remember where our goals are, where we want to end up, and making sure that we lay down the runway for us to continue to go ahead seamlessly with our podcast. As for your question about, do you think millennials believe true life balance involves pursuing your passion? I guess I'll just speak for myself. I think I am someone who has learned to detach my value a lot from the work I'm doing. And I think that's such a big mindset shift that I've been having for the first couple of years outside of college, because I spent all of college thinking about, like, okay, what career do I want to be in for the rest of my life? Like, I have to figure that out. And then I left and realized, again, I have 50 years of my life left, and I don't have to stay on the same track if I don't want to. And so always being, I guess, open to new experiences and new perspectives has been part of my passion, I guess, of wanting to make life adventurous and exciting in its own way. And I definitely just want to acknowledge that I have the blessing of being able to pursue a lot of different things because my parents decided to stay in the same occupation so that they could focus on growing their wealth, as well as focusing on my education and so that I can pursue my passions. So that is my personal perspective on pursuing passions. I don't think it's tied to a particular company or a role in any way.
Yeah, I would say tactically, to answer your question of how we juggle our day jobs, Tan and I have had to work through a lot of processes, really figure out what works best for both of us, since especially now that our schedules are quite different. So something we do is we try to avoid doing podcast recordings on the work day. So on the work day, after a long day of work, we'll just rest and do our thing. And we record mostly on Saturdays and Sundays. And that has really helped us be able to focus on the different parts of our life. And do you think millennials believe true life balance involves pursuing passions? I think that a lot of people around me really value kind of having a mission-driven job and pursuing their passion. So that's something that people around me really believe. And I think I see a lot of millennials pursuing these like side hustles because it's actually really hard to have your first job be something that checks all the boxes. So from just like a recruiting perspective at a really big company like Microsoft, I don't really have much say in what team I'm placed on. And also, especially for a product manager, a lot of companies don't want earlier in career product managers. I'm very lucky that I'm at Microsoft that actually hires PM straight out of college. And so if I wanted to switch job, it's actually really hard for me to switch out of my current job. And also if I were to switch to a totally different type of product, they're going to ask for like industry specific knowledge. So you can see how difficult of a position that puts me in. First of all, they don't like people who are young, AKA me. Second of all, if I want to switch to something else, they want someone with that experience. Well, how am I going to get that experience? And so I think a lot of millennials have these side hustles because it's a way for them to create opportunities for themselves to build skills. Like, for example, Todd and I have learned about social media management. Like, how do we tell our story on social media and story tell our value and differentiation? That's not something that I really practice in my work, but that's now a skill that I've created an opportunity to practice. And so yes, I think millennials are encouraged to pursue their passions, and also from a tactical perspective, creating your own opportunities to work on something that you like outside of work opens up a lot of doors that might not be there given your age and your circumstance. So Liana, I would love to hear from you. Like, how do you juggle your podcast with your work?
So full disclosure, my podcast is about Star Trek. Okay, so I'm a giant nerd, and most of y'all don't see the wall. This nothing but Star Trek faces and comic books and everything else. It's a nerdy podcast, and it is very new. We actually tied it to the end of the Lower Decks broadcast and to the start of the new season of Star Trek Discovery. And the juggling, it's funny, you guys talked about doing yours only on the weekends. My podcast partner and I, we have to broadcast by a specific date and time so we can publish by the weekend. So because the episode drops, we record and then it goes live. So I've had a crash course on how quickly it is to change up a schedule. And quite honestly, all of my career has been that, coming from the .com era when I basically lived at work. I kind of I've learned that, yeah, you're not always going to have balance. And much like in Star Wars, you have the force and light and dark and balance. You have, there's some days that it's going to be like this, and there's other days that is going to be slightly different. I have let my management know at work that I do this podcast, and I also assured them that it would not interfere with my work. And it's funny because I work from home, so my job is over there. My podcast recording is right here, so they all see it when I'm on video call. But I think that there's a way to balance the two out, and I've actually learned a lot from my younger colleagues. My podcast partner is a I think Gen Z, because he's in his late 20s. What does that make him? Gen Z, right? He's 26, 27. He just had a birthday yesterday.
Like a millennial, sort of millennial cusp, yeah. Gen Z.
Cusp Gen Z, right? So he's actually quite younger. And, I learned a lot from him on how to manage the schedule, because he does our podcast and he does another one the next day for another franchise. So I also just want to add that millennials have a lot to teach us about being able to juggle that schedule and understanding, being curious about what's different, and something that I find some of my fellow Gen Xers like getting, set in their ways. I'm like, no, remember how we used to be? That's what millennials are today. And that's what Gen Zers are going to be like too as well. So just keeping that open. So.
Also, I love that your podcast is about Star Trek, something completely different from your job. And I personally don't watch Star Trek, but I'm sure there are some folks here who probably watch Star Trek. So you should definitely go check out Liana's podcast. And I hope that brings you a lot of joy, Liana.
It does. It's a way. It's funny you're talking about the side hustle being your passion. Yes, my passion's always been science fiction and everything else on that nerd side. So this is a way for me to pursue that.
Yay. On that note, I think we're like just good on time, and I am very sad to have to end this discussion, but thank you all so much for answering all the questions. Really appreciate it. And of course, thank you all so much for getting into the nitty-gritty of why it's important to support millennials and, what we've been facing as millennials entering into the workforce. Thank you for sharing and being vulnerable, sharing your personal stories and what you've experienced up until now in the workplace, and why it's important for us to be, transparent, especially as, employees and as managers, as we move up in, the corporate ladder and in our, passion projects. I think it's just so important, that's how we connect. That's how we can, get the conversation going, and that's how we can actually start talking about some very difficult things, especially with what's going on right now. We touched a little bit on, the movement and of course our environment in the times being, virtual and not being able to be in a physical space with one another. I think it would be a very fruitful discussion if we were able to do this again to kind of touch on those points. And that really segues and goes in further with our diversity and inclusion series that we're trying to do as well. So Sophia, Don, Liana, thank you so very much. Everyone that has participated and submitted your questions to the chat, thank you so very much. I also popped in the resources. I don't want to do a share slide. I don't want to take away from what we're already used to right now. So I popped in the resources in the chat. So if you wanted to go ahead and copy that down. If you want to, Liana, share your podcast, I know that wasn't shared on there, but for folks who are interested, if you want to pop that link in there, that would be great. But for everyone else, you have Bamboo and Glasses Instagram and website, so check them out, subscribe. I know folks have already done that. Absolutely amazing. It would just be this amazing conversation times what, like 79, I think you're all at, or like 80. And then, AAPA is on there as well. Liana is on there as well. So please make sure to stay connected with us and let us know if you want to hear, of course, more of these conversations. That is why we started this virtual idea talks, is because we wanted to create these conversations that the community wants. Let us know what you want. We want to bring them to you, and we want to talk about what's relevant, and we definitely want to stay connected with one another, because as this discussion is very fruitful, very valuable, very important, and it brings a whole bunch of new perspectives for folks who maybe aren't millennials, right? But you, like we touched on earlier, folks are always thinking like, what's up with these millennials? Why are they always bouncing all over the place? Well, you got an inside scoop of what, a few of us are talking about. So it gives you a better idea. But yes, thank you so very much. All the praise has been coming in through the chat. Thank you all. Thank you, Liana, for sharing that, and copy and paste that, a little YouTube channel for your podcast. So folks, click on that, save that to your faves. And with that, please make sure to stay tuned to our next Idea Talks. Hopefully we'll see Bamboo and Glass again soon. And I'll allow y'all to unmute, say your thanks, give a round of applause, and then we'll end the session for today. So, yay!
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to
Thank
toast
you.
President-elect Biden, by the way. I did pop some champagne earlier.
Yeah, our champagne for breakfast. Thank you so much.
You all are so great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
This was so
Caroline.
fun.
Follow you on Instagram. So much.
Instant connections. You know, there's no difference in the generations on so many levels. I think somebody early on put something about celebrating our what we have in common, and you're absolutely right, Machen. We have so many things in common to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so many. And Sophia, Dawn, thank you so much. It was just, I refrain from just like going, yes, absolutely, like most of the time. And I was like, no. Yeah, I was over here like, yes, exactly, like trying to refrain. But I was like, managed to Zoom.
I know, it's just such a bummer to like not feel that everyone's presence in real life. But yeah, Liana, I loved your stories about your ERG so much, like how much you leaned into them, how much they shaped your career and the decisions that you made at each point. Yeah, I think there's so much more. I kind of just, forget that sometimes when you ask, people are so willing to support, and I think your story just motivates me to be more bold in my asks.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, just Microsoft is responsible for so much of my career anyway, right? Because of database technologies. And now like HoloLens, I could talk to you for hours on so many things. I could tell with both you and Dayton. So
Yeah, this was amazing, y'all. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll catch up. We'll do a debrief. I'll let y'all know with the recording, and let me know if you need anything from me. But I actually have to jet off to another work thing. So thank you all so much. Really, 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 really appreciate it. And we'll catch up through email for sure.
thanks,
Sounds
guys.
great. Thank
Thank
you. Bye.